episode 32 of our weekly CRICKETher Vodcast. We are at home again, and we're going to be talking about several different bits of news this week. First up, we've heard in the last few days that Ireland are going to be playing Scotland in some 50 over matches and some 20 over internationals at La Manga in Spain at the end of November. So that seems like good news, doesn't it, Syd?
Yeah, it's a great idea. So they're playing two 50 over games, which are not going to be officially internationals because Scotland is not a full member nation of the ICC, and then three T20 internationals. And I just think that it's a really smart idea to get over there to Spain, and here's Spain, and La Manga's about halfway, 2/3 of the way down the right-hand side of Spain. The weather's there is going to be great. I've been near there at Christmas in the past, and it's been t-shirt weather. So it's going to be warm. There's not likely to be rain. Okay, sod's law says there probably will be some rain come along because it comes along. But I think it's a really smart idea to get their players some cricket, and I think it's also something that England maybe should be looking at as well in times like these where it's difficult. You're struggling to find the times where you can actually go and play cricket. Let's be imaginative, like Scotland and Ireland have been, and go, well, we can play cricket in Spain. There's nothing to stop us. Let's go do it. So fantastic, and I think that the players are going to love going out there. They're going to have a great time. They're going to get some proper cricket.
Will it be warmer than Derby?
I think that there's a very strong likelihood that it will be warmer than Derby.
Lovely.
But who's going to win, do you think, Raf? That's an interesting question. I mean, obviously Ireland, the higher ranked side, but...
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be really interesting. I don't know to what extent we're going to be able to follow them from here, but I guess that we'll at least be able to see scorecards, at the very least. But yeah, going to be interesting to see what happens in the sense of Ireland have got quite a few of their top players missing, or MIA, missing in Australia. I believe that some of them are out there playing club cricket over the winter. And obviously they don't have Kim Garth anymore. She is MIA permanently. Whereas Scotland have obviously got Catherine and Sarah Bryce, Scotland's very own Smash Sisters. You might term them, who have obviously had a really successful time for the Lightning in the Rachel Heo Flint Trophy, and will be looking to continue that amazing run of form between them, and actually have between the two of them have played more top level cricket over the last few months than anyone from any of the sides. So you would think that Scotland could potentially rack up some wins there. And that could be really interesting for them, particularly as we kind of go into a period where there's going to be qualification tournaments coming up, potentially for the World Cups and the Commonwealth Games. That could be a bit of a fillip for them, couldn't it? So it's going to be really exciting to see what happens. Now, the Women's Big Bash League, whatever edition this is, has got underway much earlier today, if you're English. So Syd, now you are a well-known, loyal Hobart Hurricanes fan. How's it going so far?
Well, it was a strong start. Megan Shute bowled a wide first up, but it kind of went downhill from there. If you're a Hurricanes fan, Megan Shute took a wicket. The next ball, Rachel Priest for a golden duck. I believe it's a golden duck, even though she'll sort of face one illegitimate delivery, and then Hayley Matthews, another golden duck. So two legitimate deliveries, and there were 2 wickets down, both with their 2 best players, and it kind of went downhill from there. They got bowled out for 80 odd, and strikers took no time at all to get those runs. So it wasn't great if you're a Hurricanes fan, but I think that if you're a Hurricanes fan, this is probably a life you've got used to now. I understand this is largely also true in the other game. Well, they did win it a couple of years ago in the men's game, didn't they? Okay. I think they certainly had one season where they did very well. Might have got to the final.
Just
I'm not
be
sure.
A bit careful talking about men's cricket on here.
Yeah. Mm.
Anyway, are you still supporting them, Syd?
Oh, of course. I don't think now's the time to ditch them in their hour of need. But I fear this season could be their hour of need.
Now the Canes were beaten by a bit of an effort from one of your other favourite players, weren't they, Syd?
Yeah, Laura Wolvaardt had a great game. I remember seeing her score her first international century against Ireland sort of 4 or 5 years ago when she was 17. And, as there sometimes are when people do well against Ireland, there are always question marks against they can do it against Ireland, but can they do it against real opposition? But Laura Wolvaardt, the last couple of years, has really become a quality player, and she's done it against all the big teams. She so nearly got South Africa, of course, to the T20 World Cup final.
Yeah.
And she did it against Dacia. The highlights, if you can catch the highlights of that game, she played beautifully. She was driving just so nicely, and she just looks like a top player, and she's going to be a top player for many years to come. So really exciting to see. And she managed to get a 50, despite the fact they were only chasing 80 something. So that shows you that she was really motoring.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's striking that. A few years ago, she was very much...
Striking because she's a striker.
Yeah,
striking.
Exactly.
Very
I was
good.
wondering if you were going to pick up on that pun. It's striking that a few years ago she was considered, and very much considered herself, a 50-over player, and is obviously now very, very capable in the shorter format. So that's great to see. Now, there was one other game that managed to get played today. We were meant to have 4, but the other 2 were basically... One of them was completely rained off, and the other one ended up being a no result because of rain. But the other one that did manage to get completely played was Scorchers against the Heat. What happened in that one, Sid?
Well, the Brisbane Heat won that one. That was a bit more of a close game. Scorchers got 130 odd, and the Brisbane Heat chased them down. Grace Harris did Grace Harris things, scored 50 runs reasonably smartly, and that was enough to get them within touching distance. She actually got out towards the end. But they finished it off reasonably easily. Now the Heat is going to be really interesting this season, of course, because they'd lost players, and we were like, the whole competition is going to be rebalancing away from the Heat. But they've come out of the blocks and done it again, haven't they, Raf? And against your favourite team, the Scorchers.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Sid. So a few days ago we were sort of making predictions amongst ourselves, weren't we? And I said that I thought that Perth Scorchers might go on and win this tournament. Now, they haven't had a particularly good start, have they? But they have picked up a couple of very, very good acquisitions. They've recruited Sophie Devine, who was the player of the tournament last WBBL, and also Beth Mooney, who's going to be opening up with her, who was, of course, the player of the tournament in the World Cup in Australia. So 2 very, very quality players who are going to be at the top of their batting order. And I just think that they have got a lot of strength with the bat this season. Potentially they might struggle with the bowling a little bit more, but I think that Perth Scorchers were the team that I was thinking might go on and win, so I suppose I'd better support that even with the result that's come in.
No, I mean, it wasn't a terrible result for them. They got 130. All their top 4 all got starts. Amy Jones got a bit of a start as well, but no one actually pushed on in that case, and that was really their problem there. No one pushed on to a big score. They all got out for sort of around 30.
So who do you think's going to win then, Sid? Come on, put your money where your mouth is.
Well, obviously the Hurricanes, Raf.
Oh, okay.
Hang on, no, we need to, sorry, reshoot that a bit.
So who do you think's going to win, Sid? Put your money where your mouth is.
Well, these tournaments difficult to call. These are strange times, but I can definitely see, I can feel a Sydney final coming on.
Ooh.
That's what I think. I think the Sydney Sixers, the Real Madrid of women's cricket. So they're gonna be right up there with their superstar lineup. But the Sydney Thunder, with Heather Knight and Tammy Beaumont in their lineup, they're going to make runs, and they're going to be a difficult side to beat. So a Sydney final, that's what I reckon is going to happen, and who knows after that.
Okay.
What do you think?
Well, I've just
Still
said,
on for the Scorchers, Raf? Still think that's where it's going?
I've just said that I have to stick to my original prediction, I'm afraid. No rewinding the tape for this girl. I think it's going to be interesting to see how the Melbourne teams get on, isn't it? Obviously, here in the UK, where things have just basically been completely chaotic for the entire country, we maybe don't appreciate so much the fact that in most of Australia, normal life to an extent has been going on, but in Melbourne, it hasn't necessarily been to the same extent, and so therefore those teams, the couple of Melbourne teams, haven't been able to train as squads to the extent that the other teams have, and so potentially might struggle, and that includes Meg Lanning's new side, doesn't it?
It does, her new old side.
Yes.
But Meg Lanning, they did get a bat today, although that game wasn't completed, and Meg Lanning made runs again.
So basically, she doesn't need to practice.
Well, Annabelle Sutherland also looked in good form.
Okay.
I watched that innings. So, you know, and you can never discount a side with Meg Lanning in it, right?
No,
you can't.
You'd be a fool to do so. Okay. Well, we'll keep bringing you news from not quite the front line of the WBBL, given that we're 10,000 miles away, but, you know, as close as we can get to the front line. Now, the final thing that we were going to talk about today is the fact that over the next couple of weeks, the ECB are going to be announcing the next tranche of domestic contracts. So the idea was to announce 40 contracts overall by the end of October. We've already had 25 contracts announced, which were the retainer contracts that have been running for the last few months. And we know that all those 25 players will now get bumped up to being kind of permanently contracted players. So they're going to get a bit of a pay rise, we assume, based on the figures that we've previously been given. But also we're going to get 15 brand new contracts. We're going to get 15 players being awarded those, aren't we?
We are. So who do you think deserves a contract, Raf?
Well, that's a great question. I think one of the tricky things is actually balancing the contracts amongst the different sides, because we believe that each of the regions is meant to end up with the same number of contracted players, and actually some of the regions seem to have kind of more candidates for these domestic contracts than others based on performances in the Rachel Flint Trophy. So particularly Western Storm, I think, and the obvious candidate to me, looking at the numbers, is Georgia Hennessy. So she took 11 wickets at 4.8 in the competition, in the Rachel Flint Trophy, and she scored 209 runs, which was mainly based on 2 really great innings, including a century against the Sunrisers. And so I think she's definitely in with a shout. So many years ago she was in the England Academy and was considered the future England prospect, but she's had a bit of a tricky few years, I think. So I interviewed her on the very first day of the competition, actually, when we were at Beckenham watching the Storm, and I think she took 4 wickets on that day, and she was very open about the fact that she struggled over the last few years, that a couple of years ago she'd got to a kind of difficult place mentally, and actually this new regional competition has kind of really given her an opportunity to I guess almost reset the way that she thinks about her cricket and the way that she plays her cricket, and she certainly looks to be much fitter than she was a couple of years ago, and she said to me that she'd been working really hard on her fitness, and there's obviously kind of reaped the rewards of that in the numbers. So I think she's definitely up there in terms of people who have made a really strong case for a contract. What do you think, Sid? Who's the top of your list?
Well, for the Southern Vipers, there's an interesting question around Lauren Bell, who's still studying at Loughborough, and you would expect will probably get an England contract as soon as she graduates from Loughborough. So just bypassing her for a moment, I think the obvious candidate is going to be Maya Bouchier, who had a good season, finally got the opportunities to bat at the top of the order, and get out there and score some runs in a situation where she wasn't coming in at 7 in a T20 match with 20 balls left, and really prove that she can do it. Also had some fantastic fielding from her, so I definitely expect her to be one of them. Okay. Who else have you got on your mind, Raf?
Well, it relates to Storm having this dilemma a bit, because I've got a couple of other Storm players who I think have certainly made a really good case. One of them is Alex Griffiths with the bat, 141 runs, a strike rate of 118, I think it was. And that is a really impressive strike rate for somebody scoring that volume of runs. Yeah,
she was the only player in the kind of the top 20 ranked batters that had a strike rate of over 100 in the tournament.
Yeah.
So that's pretty impressive.
Absolutely. And she's kind of the right age bracket, you might think, in terms of people who could potentially go on and have an England career. So we know that the regions are largely being given autonomy in these selection decisions, but the ECB is also informing them and kind of assisting them. And I would think that the ECB will be probably pushing quite hard for her to be given a contract, because at this stage, at the age that she's at, that could be quite important for her player development. The other person from the Storm who I think has made a really good case, though, is Nat Wraith. And I just was particularly thinking about her innings that we saw in person at the Ageas Bowl. And obviously all of the plaudits that day went to Georgia Adams, and the kind of secondary plaudits went to Sophie Luff, because she also had a very good day with the bat. But Nat Wraith really supported her. I think they had a partnership of over 100 that day, and they really did look together that they might be kind of getting close to that target. I think the Vipers got a bit nervous, and you got a bit nervous as a Vipers supporter. And so, yeah, she's been really important, and of course has looked quite tidy with the gloves as well behind the stumps. And given that England have got a bit of a situation where they haven't necessarily got any young keepers coming through at the moment, I think in the academy, are there any keepers?
No, I don't think there are in the main academy, no.
Okay, and so that's a bit tricky, isn't it? That's a bit of a difficult situation that they will definitely be looking to plug that gap, and she could be the answer to that. So yeah.
Yeah, and of course she doesn't have to stay at the Storm. There's nothing to stop players moving. I mean, the idea of paying someone, an actual salary is that in theory they could move somewhere else and go and play elsewhere. So there's also an opportunity for players to move, and maybe she's one that could do that to get that contract.
Yeah, potentially. Any others on your radar, Syd?
Well, I want to put in a mention in a word for Clare Boycott, who really impressed me when we saw the Sparks play this season. I'm gonna admit it. I'd never seen her play before. Although Worcestershire, crossed swords with Berkshire a few times over the last couple of years. I never caught any of those games. But seeing her play for the first time live, I was really impressed with her consistency. Consistency is a lot of what slow bowling is all about. If you don't have speed, you need to be able to be very naggy at the batsman, and she did that, and I was really impressed with her, and I think that she could well be in line for one. And I think what's really interesting about that is it proves that there have been players down in the lower reaches of the county championship that have been playing for sides like Worcestershire, where the side aren't making Div 1 and they're not making the headlines. But there are some good players there, and hopefully, the new regional system will kind of pull out those players. So I think that Clare Boycott's got a good chance of being offered those if she wants it, of course. And I think it's important to remember coming up that some of the players, just won't want those contracts, right? Charlotte Taylor, for example, I don't think that she's going to want a contract. She's got a decent job, She's a bit older. Phoebe Graham's another one, almost certainly wouldn't take a contract if he was given it. Katie Levick, another one.
Well, people who are already established in their existing careers and who are kind of late 20s and who are probably thinking, well, it's not necessarily a time in my career where I know that I can then go on and take advantage of that contract in a way. So it's partly about, is it worth that gamble of giving up the economic security I've already got in exchange for what isn't a huge amount of money for potentially only, a few years. So yeah, that is certainly going to be potentially some of those conversations will be had between the players and the regions. Potentially have already been had in some cases in terms of who got those regional retainers. I just want to finish though by saying, isn't it really great that at a time when the ECB are having to make all these cuts, and at a time when we know that it's a really difficult economic climate, that they're following through on their promise for these 40 contracts? It would have been actually it would have been a decision that wouldn't maybe have been too controversial given the current climate to actually say, well, I'm really sorry guys, but we're just going to stick with 25 contracts for now. But no, they are actually following through on these 40 contracts. And that's so important, especially in the context of conversations that I think we were having in last week's podcast about trying to compete with Australia. And even 40 contracts isn't going to do that job, but it's a really important step along the way. And therefore, kudos to the ECB. We criticise them enough when we don't agree with what they're doing, but we should give them credit for this decision, actually.
Absolutely.
Right, that's it from us this week. Have a nice time over the next few days. Enjoy WBBL where you can, and we'll see you in a week's time.
Bye.